Economia partidei, Delgado acolo este, va fi corner, dragi ascultători.
All right, fumble around, everything we need. Yes, I think we're good, okay. Hello everybody and welcome back to It Ain't Broke for a very special spooky black and white plastic stag episode. I would like to welcome all the way by Transmat Transport from the parallel timeline, Earth 2 Duncan.
Hello.
Welcome back, Earth 2 Duncan.
Thank you very much.
Today we're going to talk about Whistle and I'll Come to You, the M.R. James adaptation that was part of the BBC Art Strand Omnibus in 1968, which many of you may or may not have seen, I don't know. Duncan's wanted to talk about it for a really long time, and you showed it to me Christmas time, I suppose.
Yeah, I think we watched it the first time we shot some of these actually.
The first set of Italian things.
That's it, yeah.
We
I've been
watched.
pestering Richard to do this because I'm a massive M.R. James fanboy and I really like this particular adaptation. In my opinion, it's probably the best of the adaptations of M.R. James's work, so thought it'd be cool to talk about.
Yeah, so its cultural kind of cachet is that it's sort of one of the Christmas horror story things. You've told me that's not really the case.
So, as Richard mentioned, this was part of BBC's Omnibus series, which is, I don't think they don't do it anymore, do they?
No, I think that was around when we were kids, right? But
it was, yeah. But there's a kind of a more well-known series called A Ghost Story for Christmas, which this kind of gets retroactively wrapped into. That really started in the 1970s with sort of colour adaptations that shared cast sometimes and stuff like that, and it's kind of still going now. Actually, they've had a few.
They had a kind of semi-revival.
Yeah, they've had a few revivals. So there was some that they did in kind of the mid-2000s. And then they did another adaptation of Whistle and I'll Come to You in 2010 with John Hurtin, which we'll talk about a bit later. And then there've been a few more that Mark Gatiss has done since then. So we did Tractate Mid-Off a few years ago. One called The Dead Room, I think it was last year, which was his own story, which I personally thought was oh, sorry.
No,
we're not allowed to swear anymore, are we?
Fuck wank
It was
cock.
fucking terrible.
Fuck wank cock.
And this year they're letting him do another M.R. James though, a story called Martin's Close, which would be pretty cool because that's never been adapted for TV or anything as far as I know. So
Okay, cool. Yeah.
yeah,
so
this is kind of
a
the
story
original
thing.
one. It's not really part of the series, but it is essentially.
Right.
So yeah, the original story was published in 1904 in M.R. James's first collection of stories called Ghost Stories of an Antiquary, and it's kind of probably one of the most well-known of his stories. Probably my personal favourite, and it's kind of a cliched one to say that about, but it is just a really good story. The TV adaptation sort of differs from the original story in some ways, but it's fairly faithful compared to the 2010 version. It follows it reasonably closely.
Okay.
So yeah, the basic storyline is that there's a character, Professor Parkins, who's a kind of stuffy old academic. Well, he's old in this, but in the original book, he's actually in his 20s.
But by the standards of 1968, that is what a man in his 20s looked like.
Yeah.
It's grotesque. That's a common thread on this channel, is how grotesquely unhealthy people used to be. Anyway.
Yeah, so Parkins is played by Michael Hordern in this. Absolutely fantastic casting. I mean, I think he's one of the things about this. The way I feel about this adaptation is it's probably quite a Marmite thing. Like, I think if you've got the right mindset, you really enjoy it. If you don't, you probably just find it really boring. And I think his performance kind of ties into that, in that you're either going to love it or it's just minimal. Absolutely do your head
It's
in.
very minimal. The whole thing is minimal, and I think part of the problem is to watch it through the scope of now with the way it's just, they don't make things like this anymore, and I don't mean that in a kind of I don't make it like this. They literally don't make things like this anymore.
It's very, very much a slow burn. A lot of people would say nothing really happens in it, but that's kind of
I mean, that's kind of the thing. I think that's kind of what works about it, is because it's kind of this ambling, sort of probably autistic character that barely communicates with anyone, sort of walks around grumbling and grunting, goes for a trudge around the district.
Yeah, a good trudge around the district. Yeah, I mean, sort of probably about 60% of his performance is just eating noises, like eating breakfast really noisily, just like stuff like that. So if you don't like people making loud eating noises, do not watch this.
Yes, no. If that bothers you, then this is not.
But I mean, the performance is really central to it. I think it's one of the things that really makes it, in my opinion. But yeah, getting back to the plot. So basically, Parkins is this old academic. He goes on I think it's supposed to be a break over some sort of break. The term breaks up or something. In the book, it's kind of there's a little preamble where he's chatting with other academics at his Cambridge University. So he goes off on a little sort of holiday for a few days to the sort of Suffolk coast. While he's there, he decides to go and check out this sort of old Knights Templar preceptorate it's meant to be. He's digging around there and he finds an old whistle, which he takes back to his gaff, this place that he's staying, cleans it up, and there's a Latin inscription on the side, which he sort of understands, but he says something like, what is it? Who is it that is coming, or something like that.
Yeah, that's right.
Who is this who is coming? So he's like, oh.
Which in itself is kind of, I think what helps build the tension in this is how oblivious he is.
Yeah.
Because he's found a spooky whistle with a kind of ominous, vague message. He's like, fuck it, give it a 2. Like, I know he's not like that.
Yeah, that's what I mean. That's what he says. He says the only way to find out evidently is to whistle for him. So he does. And then, yes, spooky things.
Spooky things transpire. I think now, is your edition of this like a BFI?
Yes, the BFI have put this out on DVD. So there was like an old DVD which went out of print for years and you couldn't get hold of it. Now I think they've released all the ghost stories for Christmas apart from the most recent ones. Mm-hmm. So it's available as like part. I think the DVD that you get now comes with the 2010 version, which changes a lot of the story, and it's quite frankly terrible.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's sort of like it's like when I first got Blues Brothers on DVD, and you had to have Blues Brothers 2000 in the same book.
Right. Yeah, that's what it is. So you kind of have to pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
The new. Just to quickly mention the new version. Basically, it changes a lot of the story. So John Hurt's the main character, but he's not a professor. He's just some guy who goes back to, I think it's somewhere him and his wife went when they were younger, but his wife now has dementia. So there's this whole subplot about his wife having dementia, which is just nothing.
Is that? I say I haven't seen that version. Is that? Do you think that's for runtime? Is it longer? That one?
I don't think it is longer actually.
Yeah.
It's definitely not. I don't know why they do.
So sometimes I find with adaptations of stuff, because I've studied adaptation academically, and I think there's not one to sound like a pretentious ass, but there you go. There's sometimes changes are necessary, right? Because if something is very narration based, and sometimes it's not going to work for your story, so you have to give that kind of information to other characters to confirm stuff like that. Sometimes it feels like they just put things in for the sake of it.
The 2010 version totally falls into that second category. So I mean, it's not, for some reason it's not a whistle, it's a ring that he finds. Why?
Does he blow it and it still whistles?
I don't know, it just has the ring. And then like the ghost, when it turns up at the end, is his wife
ring and I'll come
screaming
to
in his
you?
face. Like... someone online described it as ring and I'll come scream at you, which is basically sums it up perfectly.
That seems a bit... Yeah.
There's no reason for the change other than, oh, we're redoing it, so maybe we should change it. And the
it.
dementia subplot is just kind of, it just feels really forced in, and it's just...
Well, going back to kind of the text, so to speak, I'm just going to move my recorder there so I can see what time we're on. It's really minimal, and I think that's what kind of works. And I think the problem is, and I said there are problems with it in that I don't think you can show it to a modern audience because they're so used to, I'm not saying people won't get it, but like the ending, I can see, if you show it to a younger person, I can see them laughing at it.
That's important to say. I mean, the ending to...
Let's go into spoiler territory for this 50-year-old.
The ending, the ghost is basically a sheep.
It's very much
which
it doesn't have eye holes in it though.
No, it doesn't. And it is what happens in the book. Although in the original story, obviously, because they're not reliant on the 1960s BBC TV budget, there's more to it.
Yeah.
Whereas in this, it's just kind of a sheet rising up out of the bed, which it's definitely a make or break moment.
Yes.
For the film. If you're into kind of archaic horror stories and ghost stories, and you're happy to just suspend disbelief or whatever, I personally find it does work really well, and it is quite creepy. However, I suspect a lot of people watching this would just find it laughable.
Yeah, I mean, I get that. I mean, I think we have now when there are people who have expectations, and if you build something up, they want something spectacular. Yeah. It's like, well, hold on, this is a 1968 omnibus episode. Yeah. So it's good, and I think the way the sheet moves and stuff, the way it's kind of animated or puppeted or whatever, it's got that kind of janky, sort of uncanny feel to it.
That's it, I think. I mean, so when it actually happens, that whole sequence is, I think it's like the film's running at a slower speed or something, because Parkins kind of moves kind of jerkily. Yeah. He makes these weird noises, which kind of...
It gets very dreamlike.
It does, which I think is an important sort of point with this, is I think the horror elements do work precisely because they are quite dreamlike, I think. So before the actual kind of, the denouement, the Jamesian wallop, as as it's sometimes referred to. There's a very good M.R. James podcast called The Podcast of the Curious.
Right.
These two guys, and they described most M.R. James stories have what they call the Jamesian wallop. Which
Right.
Is,
Okay.
You know, the ghostly part or the
Yeah.
main kind of. So, but prior to that, he has a series of kind of dreams, or it's kind of that thing, you know, where you're on the edge of falling asleep but not quite, where he's kind of on the beach and he's being pursued by this thing which appears in various forms, which do work really well, I think, precisely because they do feel genuinely nightmarish in a way, not like a, you know, nightmarish as in not so terrifying, but as in that kind of, when you are having an actual nightmare, you know, it's often quite uncanny and weird, and it's not just total full-on terror. It's
they
just
they never make sense except for in the moment.
Exactly,
You
and
know.
I think it does have that kind of feel to it, and for me, that is how it.
I think that's what makes it relatable, because it's so minimal.
Yeah.
And it's about, like, so I'm getting that light reflection on my face. It's so minimal, and that makes it believable.
Yeah.
Because it's got this kind of quality of just this lonely man walking around mumbling to himself, and he's seeing things that are mostly static.
Yeah. I mean, there's barely any other characters in it. The only other characters really are the guest house that he's staying at. So there's the manager that runs it. There's a brilliant scene when he arrives and he and the manager have a conversation, but the entire thing is mumbled basically. So there's almost no actual words exchanged. It's like that, and it's just there's a couple of maids staying there, you know, who work at the guest house you see. But other than that, there's a few other guests. The main other character, I suppose, is this character of the Colonel, he does share some dialogue with kind of over breakfast, and he ends up kind of bursting into the room after he has this encounter with the apparition at the end. He's probably the only sort of other main.
Yeah, even that conversation is pretty like non-existent.
Exactly. Like, I mean, most of it is Michael Walden's character just walking around outside, sitting down, having a picnic. It's. I mean, you could say hardly anything happens, but that's kind of the magic of it.
I think that there's a lot to be said for that. That's the thing. I mean, because I think I'm not. I complain about things being too long often, and this is quite the opposite. Some might say it feels longer, but that's up to them. You know, if they're not into that
it is.
vibe.
I can't remember. It's about an hour, I think.
Yeah, it runs to about an hour. This is a good example of something that is mostly about mood, and I think it's a good companion to the fact that our next thing we're going to discuss is Tetsuo Bodyhammer. The Iron Man. I always get that wrong. Tetsuo Iron Man, the first one, and that is very much. It's the complete opposite of this, but it shares a lot with it. It's
true.
Like it's black and white 60mm film. It's 4:3 cropped. It's cheap, but it's the complete opposite. It's absolutely a total gear change away from this, whereas this is still. I mean, because things even like David Lynch. It's got a vibe of that. Obviously before all that. It kind of feels like that. And one of the other things kind of about the Jamesian thing is that it is kind of based out of this part of the country. So James was.
So he was the provost of King's College.
Provost of King's College. So
also Eton, but King's College
for context in Cambridge, King's College is the biggest Cambridge University. It's not the biggest by number, but it's the most famous and most prestigious, arguably, of the Cambridge colleges.
So he attended King's, and then he ended up being provost there. I think at the time he went, and this was back in the late 1800s, that was the time when only people from Eton could go to King's. That was
There was traditionally it was.
And it was like a one in, one out type of deal.
King's was originally built for 12 scholars of Eton.
Yeah.
Was the idea by Henry the 6th, 7th, and 8th, because it took so long. Because building massive stone cathedral type buildings takes decades, and loads of people die when you don't have any machines. But anyway, and then the action, so to speak, takes place on the Norfolk coast.
James was very much into Norfolk and Suffolk. He wrote a guidebook actually on.
Your wife's from Norfolk, right?
Suffolk? Yeah, she grew up there.
Oh, she grew up there. Yeah. But that's just like the next counties up, really.
Yeah. So and the coast round there is really nice. It's a different feel, isn't it? It's quite just flat and sparse and bleak, which kind of ties in really well with a lot of the.
That's precisely where I was going. Yeah. It's a bleak kind of part of the world.
Yeah, but in a kind of.
Endearing
way.
In a weirdly lovely way, yeah, because it's sort of like East Anglia, this part of the country is just flat.
Yeah.
Right. So particularly in certain times of year, if you're in Cambridgeshire or Suffolk or Norfolk, it's just you should just be standing out in a field or sort of just be like, Jesus Christ, because there's just all there is horizon. And just trees. And when you go out to they're kind of lucky really, because this is shot the outside stuff is shot on an overcast bleak day.
Yeah.
Which just creates the whole look of this is, and the outdoor scene is very kind of low contrast. There's a bit more kind of lighting, of course, on the indoor stuff, but like him picking his way about the beach. And when you walk around the beaches in Norfolk, there's those little kind of tufts of grass and sand dunes.
And just the occasional like wooden groin going into the sea, but that's kind of it.
Yeah. And you know, sometimes because we used to holiday in Norfolk when I was a kid, you would often, and this isn't related to this film, but it's part of the weird gnarly vibe of Norfolk because it kind of goes out pretty much across to Europe. You would get weird, rusted Silent Hill stuff just washed up. Right. My brother and I once found a French cash register washed up in Great Yarmouth, and it was all kicked and rusty with like French lettering on it and stuff. And it absolutely like it should be the head of a Silent Hill villain. You know what I mean? So it's Norfolk. I think that is important in all seriousness that it has that weird, spooky vibe.
And it's integral to a lot of James's stories. Actually, a lot of them are set there. And there's a later Ghost Stories for Christmas, A Warning to the Curious. That is again set on the Norfolk coast, and it totally is a big part of the kind of whole vibe of it. And it works really well in this as well. Like I think when he first picks up, when Parkins first finds the whistle and takes it back, before he's actually blown it even, you see him walking back on the beach towards his guest house at kind of dusk. The sun's just going down, and you can see just this figure miles away on the beach, and it's just something about that. It's just such a lovely shot. You just think, you've screwed up already. Yeah. That's what I mean. There's this kind of, because okay, admittedly, the climax isn't so much of a climax, but it's the weird, awful portent like that, the figure on the beach, and just that they cut to close-ups just to show his sort of reaction to what we don't often see. You know, it's all this stuff that you're then forced to imagine, which is way worse than. Yeah, I mean, I'm a big advocate of that in horror. You know, I think you know a lot of ghost-based stuff, particularly. You see these days, they'll just go way too far with it and show way too much, and that's like a death sentence for it. Like the less you show, the more effective.
Well, that's kind of the thing with the xenomorph, right? It gets less and less scary, and I've kind of found like, okay, I'm not sure it really applies to this, but I've only seen It Chapter 1 and It Chapter 2 has just come out. It Chapter 1 is pretty much a guy going, I'm a scary clown, look at me, and it's just like, well, I've seen that. Because I just read recently that, did you watch Bird Box on Netflix with Sandra Bullock?
No, I never got around to watching it.
I really like it. It's had mixed reactions from people I know, but I happen to really like it. I thought it was really effective, kind of Stephen King style. Right. You know, it's nothing too highfalutin, it's a basic concept, but you never see, the concept is obviously you have to not look, and that's extended to you. You never see the creatures. But it seems that originally they did design something, and they were thinking about showing you it, and it was going to be like a cherub bird creature. Right. It's like, I think it was like a bird with like a cherubic face or something, and just like, that already sounds shit.
As soon as you go too far down that route, you just end up ruining it. Yeah. So I'm a big fan of the original Blair Witch Project. I know everyone says, oh, nothing happens in it, but that's why it's good. You never see anything. I got to admit, I've never quite, not for that reason, I never quite got on board with it. I really like the vibe of it, but I kind of think it's like, with the Blair Witch Project, for me, it's kind of like knowing how a magic trick is done, if that makes sense. Because, I mean, it's kind of like we were saying, nothing happens, because the scariest stuff is the standing in the corner stuff at the end. It's just like, oh my God. You don't know what's going on, but what, it's kind of like... I'm a massive fan of that kind of thing, so... I quite like to revisit that, actually, so I haven't watched it in a while, because they just did another one a couple of years ago, didn't they? Yeah, they did, which I haven't seen. And there's the new video game is supposed to be quite good. Right. But I would put this in a kind of box with that film. Yeah. I mean, the thing with Blair Witch for me as well is I didn't watch it at the time when all the hype was going on. I literally probably watched it about 5 years ago. I watched it at the time. That's the problem, I think, because a big part of the hype, because we were still in school, different schools, but we were still in school. It was real. It was real, and they found this footage, and then that was all kind of just clever marketing, and early age of internet marketing as well. And again, that's shot partially on 16mm, partially on video. So again, it's another film that sort of visually shares a lot with this. I mean, this being televisual, I would say, and this might be a lazy comparison, but it shares a lot with, Night of the Living Dead was made by people who were working primarily in television, and it had to be done quickly. So it's more scope than this, but it's lots of locked off shots on, black and white. And I mean, that's an interesting point, actually, because I actually find a lot of the time with stuff like this, the stuff that's made for television, I personally find works better. There's a certain vibe of, like, especially old British telly, where it's the kind of thing where, if you accidentally saw the wrong, the thing as a kid, it's just going to haunt you forever. And I swear that's how a lot of people end up getting into kind of being big horror buffs. I mean, I think the League of Gentlemen guys are all big fans of this series.
It's very Mark Gatiss has really run with that, hasn't he?
Yeah.
But if you see that in Royston Vasey.
Exactly, it's that kind of like old public information films and that kind of vibe. Which
another thing that we're going to get to
today, we will also get to this
in another
later
episode.
It applies to multiple things we're talking about. But there's something about that old British TV that I think just sometimes when it's a proper film, you kind of lose an element of, I don't know.
There is something to be said for that, yeah. I mean, and again, it does stretch to the public information films and stuff as well, because there's something really spooky and dirty about old 60mm film, because I don't know if Charlie Brooker brought this up in a Screenwrite once. But there's a Monty Python sketch where obviously for Python all their exterior was on shot film or the interior shot video, and there's that. When I was a kid, I didn't know what that was.
Yeah, it's that weird. Like when you watch like an old episode of Only Fools and Horses or something, they go outside and it looks different.
And it's all grainy. There's a sketch where they're sat around. It's like, gentlemen, I have something to tell you all. We're surrounded by film, and they look out the window and it's all shot on 60mm. So they do that thing.
Yeah, I know. I think I've seen that sketch.
Yeah, it's kind of when you see British stuff on 60mm, which is like the BBC's kind of outside unit or ITV or whoever, has a completely different vibe to it. So even when you're watching a sitcom, suddenly it's all grimy and grotty. And like Only Fools and Horses is a really great example because it's loads of 60mm film shot in Peckham 30 years ago, and that's a world that's gone now. Like because this is despite being black and white and the rest of it and its storytelling, it's kind of timeless because it's set at the beach and it's set in a guest house.
There's no kind of, because I mean the original story was obviously set in whenever James wrote it. So I think the Ghost Stories of Antiquary was published in 1904, but the stories were written prior. They were originally written to be told to a group of people at King's College, and then he decided to publish them, and then a number of books followed. So it was that kind of time. But all of his stuff is kind of it could really be set whenever. It doesn't. There are certain stories which are deliberately set in the past, but this isn't one of them. And there's no real.
I mean, it has the trappings of that era in that maids run his bath and they dress for dinner.
But it wouldn't matter if that didn't happen.
No, of course not. No, that's kind of background stuff. It exists in that world, and I kind of think the kind of weird fustiness of it is what makes it work.
Definitely. Yeah.
So if now it's just like if it was about like an Instagram influencer that finds a cursed iPhone.
That is any horror movies to do with like phones or Facebook, it just immediately shit.
Snapchat and I'll come to you.
Whatever. It wouldn't work.
I mean, you could set it in the modern era, but then what I find quite funny. I mean, it's not really necessary for this story actually, but I love it in modern horror films where you have to have a scene where everyone's phones break. because telecommunications, telecommunications is ruined horror because you sort of have to have that scene. But that doesn't affect this story because phoning someone going there's a ghost in my hotel room doesn't change.
Once that whistle's blown, or even when he's just found it, he's already on that path to.
And that's what creates that kind of dread. Is that feeling like you fucked up? Like,
and it's that thing as well with a lot of James stories where it's based on kind of some sort of archaic object. A lot of his stories are based around an archaic object or some sort of archaic knowledge, which I mean, I know H.P. Lovecraft was influenced by M.R. James quite a lot, and it's that whole, there's always that element of mystery because it's like, what is this? Where's it? You don't know.
Ancient evil.
Exactly.
It's the kind of ancient, because that's what's so spooky about the whistle. Kind of like,
what was the purpose of it?
What's it doing in Norfolk? So this is directed by Jonathan Miller, who is another kind of link to here is Cambridge Footlights guy, and he was, he didn't direct a hell of a lot of stuff, but he was I think a writer, director, a performer, possibly even a musician.
Right.
So worked with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. I think he was Footlights in the era of the Pythons and David Frost and stuff like that. Yeah. So someone who's not really a director as such, someone who did a bit of everything around that time. Not someone I know a hell of a lot about, but I just find it quite interesting because the BBC of this era was full of directors who you look at their filmographies and it's just this immensely vast thing where they would, because a lot of these people as well did kind of films of heavily scientific stuff, historical stuff, geographical stuff, news broadcasts, sports broadcasts. I was just quite interested to see that this is kind of someone who's just having a go at everything. I don't know if someone's there going, it's fucking Jonathan Miller, you peasant, but I don't know him that well. But it's just an interesting career path for him, and doesn't scream horror.
Yeah, and it's kind of a one-off for him because I mean the bulk of the 70s, the classic era of the Ghost Stories of Christmas was Lawrence Gordon Clark, who's kind of the name that's really associated with it. And he ended up doing, once they sort of finished it, he did one for ITV and stuff like that, and there are some other peripheral things. So yeah, it's just kind of a one-off thing for him, but I personally find it's the best of all of the adaptations.
And it kicked off this whole tradition of ghost stories for Christmas, like the spooky Christmas ghost stories, even though it was broadcast initially in May.
Yes, this one was. We checked that before.
We had to have
most
a look,
of them were shown at Christmas, but obviously because this wasn't part of that series, because it didn't exist, it was broadcast in May. So.
Yeah, it's we're not expecting big numbers for this one. So probably if you clicked on this, you have seen it. If you want to see it, you're going to have to buy it. It's not one of these things that's just on YouTube, is it?
It was. It might be on YouTube actually. It was a few months ago. So
okay.
I think if you like that really archaic, old school type of horror where it's very minimal and you're not bothered about crazy effects or any of that stuff, you may enjoy it. I mean, this is how I found out about Emma James, because I actually saw this. It was on one of those terrible, like Channel 4 100 Scariest Moments by Jimmy Carr.
Oh, God.
I saw it on there and I was like, just something about it just piqued my interest, and I went and looked it up. So I think even if you've never seen it before, that you may find it enjoyable. I think you just got to have the right mindset.
Sure. Yeah, I can see that.
You're either going to love it or you're going to hate it.
It wasn't a hard sell for me because I generally trust you all this kind of stuff, and I was like, oh, I'm kind of like the spooky kind of 1960s BBC vibe. I'm fine with that. So you might get it on like Daily Motion or Internet Archive. That's where I found a bunch of the Italian stuff we did. Yeah. So it's probably out there to watch. So I think that's it for this one. Whistle Now Come to You. It's spooky, it's old, it's slow. Go watch it. We're going to be back. We're doing a bunch of stuff today. We're doing another black and white episode, and we're going to do... our focus for this shoot is bleakness. So everything that Duncan's going to come back for in the next few weeks is going to be kind of bleak, depressing, or at least weird. So, that's great, isn't it? The good stuff, the good stuff. So this is what Duncan Prime and I always get wrong. Twitter, Patreon, Redbubble, PayPal, Facebook. I'm not just listing internet services. You can find us on all of those. And we do live streams, and we do these every Monday, and we do commentaries, stuff like that. So why don't you just tune in? Duncan and I are off for a trudge around the district, and we'll see you later. Support your 7th or 8th favourite YouTube channel by buying crap, tat, junk, hogwash and filth at redbubble.com/people/Val Verde Shop.